Imagine performing for thousands of screaming fans every single night, lights blazing, applause rolling over you like a wave, while carrying a secret so heavy it could have ended everything. Not a rumor, not a scandal, a truth you chose to bury so deep that even the people closest to you had no idea it existed. That is exactly where Sir Cliff Richard has been living for the last 29 years. And only now, at 85 years old, is the full picture finally coming into the light. So before you click away, ask yourself this. How well do you really know the man who never seemed to age, never married, and somehow outlasted every single trend in the music industry? Because the story you think you know, it is only half of it. He was born Harry Roger Webb in Lucknow, India, in 1940. Not the name of a rock star, not the life of one either. His father worked a comfortable job for the Indian Railways, and for the first years of his life, young Harry lived in a world of warmth and security, surrounded by his 3 sisters and a grandmother who ran a local school. It sounds idyllic, and for a while it was. But India was changing, rapidly and violently, and by 1948 his parents made the decision that uprooted everything. They packed their lives onto a ship called the SS Ranchi and spent 3 weeks crossing the ocean to England, a place that felt nothing like home. The family went from a comfortable house with help and sunshine to a council house in Cheshunt where everything was gray, tight, and unfamiliar. That shift, from warmth to cold, from belonging to starting over, never fully left him. It shaped a boy who would spend the rest of his life performing his way into the hearts of strangers, perhaps because the feeling of being welcomed by an audience was something no address or postcode could ever take away. By 16, his father bought him a guitar. That was the beginning. He joined skiffle groups, played small shows, and quickly realized that the name Harry Webb was never going to sell records. So in 1958, an entrepreneur suggested the name Cliff because it sounded like a rock. His friend added Richard as a nod to the great Little Richard. And just like that, a legend was manufactured from a filing clerk in North London who still had sawdust on his shoes. His first hit, Move It, shot to number 2 in the charts, and the British press could not write fast enough. They called him the British Elvis, the hip-swinging, leather-wearing, dangerous new thing. The Shadows became his band. The world became his stage. And for a moment, it looked like a perfectly ordinary story of a boy with talent and timing making it to the top. But then something happened that no one saw coming. In 1964, Cliff Richard walked away from the lifestyle that made him famous. Not the music, not the touring, but the world that came with it. The parties, the chaos, the women, the excess. He embraced his Christian faith so completely that he genuinely considered quitting the music industry altogether, wondering whether God and pop stardom could exist in the same man. He almost became a teacher. He almost disappeared. Instead, in 1966, he stood on a stage with the evangelist Billy Graham in front of thousands of people and told the whole world exactly who he was. It was a defining moment that split his audience in two. Some loved him more for it. Others never quite forgave him. But Cliff did not seem to care. He began making gospel music, avoiding the wild spiral of the 60s, sidestepping the drugs and the free love and the political rebellion that swallowed so many of his contemporaries whole. While the Beatles were chasing enlightenment and the Stones were burning hotel rooms, Cliff Richard was recording Mistletoe and Wine. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. He became a Christmas institution. A Eurovision nearly man. His song Congratulations in 1968 was robbed, many still believe, by political voting influenced by a Spanish dictator. He starred in films. He hosted television shows. He filled arenas for decades. And in 1995, the Queen gave him a knighthood, making him the first rock star in history to receive that honor. Sir Cliff Richard. Clean, polished, ageless, Britain's very own Peter Pan of pop. But here is what nobody was talking about. Beneath that immaculate surface, Cliff was making choices about his personal life that were ruthless, calculated, and far more complicated than the public image ever suggested. He came close to marriage more than once. Each time, something pulled him back from the edge, and the reasons he gave were not romantic. They were not even particularly kind. There was Jackie Irving, a 19-year-old dancer he met during a summer in Blackpool. By his own admission, she was stunning, fun, and exactly the kind of woman he could imagine building a life with. He thought about proposing. He went to his manager and asked what getting married would do to his career. When he was told he might lose a third of his fan base, he ended it. Immediately. No long goodbye. Just a cold calculation and a closed door. When Piers Morgan heard this story, he called Cliff ruthless. Cliff smiled and said it simply meant he was not in love enough to sacrifice his success. But sit with that for a moment. A man breaks a woman's heart not because his feelings changed, but because his accountant ran the numbers. That is not a romantic tragedy. That is a choice. A deliberate, eyes-open choice about what mattered most. Then there was Delia Wicks, a dancer and singer he met at the London Palladium in 1960 as his career was exploding. He liked her deeply. By his own words, she was a special girl. But rising stardom felt incompatible with loving someone properly. So he wrote her a Dear John letter and moved on. She was left devastated. He was left free to be famous. And then came Sue Barker, the tennis champion, the television presenter, the woman he tracked down after watching her celebrate a victory in Brighton, called out of the blue, and invited to a concert. They dated through Wimbledon, shared telegrams and long phone calls, and seemed for a while like they might actually be something real. But the press attention wore Sue down, and when the relationship finally ended, Cliff had a friend make the phone call to tell her it was over. Years later, decades later, he began giving interviews in which he said he had seriously considered proposing to Sue, but realized he simply did not love her enough. She had moved on. She had married. She had written a book, and she begged him in print to stop bringing her name up. She said that if she had known she would still be hearing about a few months of dating 40 years later, she would never have gone near him in the first place. He kept bringing it up anyway. There were whispers, of course. There always are. For decades, people gossiped about why he never married, never settled, and spent years living with his manager Bill Latham and Bill's mother. He was asked directly, repeatedly, whether he was gay, and each time he answered with the same quiet firmness. No, he simply did not believe marriage was something to be used as a prop or a cover. He refused to walk down the aisle just to satisfy the public. To him, single people were not second-class citizens, and he would not pretend otherwise. His closest companion for nearly 30 years was a former clergyman named John McEllen. They shared homes. They traveled together. They built a quiet, private life entirely removed from the spectacle of the stage. And whether you read anything into that or not, what it showed was a man who had arranged his world exactly as he wanted it, on his own terms, regardless of what anyone thought. Then the world turned on him. In 2014, everything Cliff Richard had built came under threat in a way that no fame, no faith, and no knighthood could protect against. A serious allegation emerged that he had been involved with a 15-year-old boy at a religious rally in Sheffield back in 1985. Then 4 more men came forward with claims stretching from the late 1950s through to the 1980s. The police became involved. The Crown Prosecution Service received the allegations, and before Cliff had even been spoken to by officers, the BBC broadcast live footage of police searching his home in Berkshire. The whole country watched. His front door, his garden, his windows, broadcast live in the middle of the afternoon as though the verdict were already in. He was never arrested. He was never charged. The cases were eventually dropped for lack of evidence. But by then, the damage was not legal. It was psychological. It was total. He described lying awake at night with the weight of it pressing down on his chest, feeling a kind of violent, consuming hatred toward the person who had made the accusation. He said the anger was so real that he wondered what he might actually do if he ever came face to face with that person. He eventually made a decision. He would never learn his accuser's name. Not out of forgiveness, not yet, but because he refused to let a nameless shadow become a face he could hate for the rest of his life. He said the person he actually hated was the idea that someone could do something so deliberately cruel to an innocent human being. He took the BBC to court and won. He campaigned, and still campaigns, for a change in British law that would prevent accused people from being publicly named before they are formally charged. He turned a nightmare into a mission. But while he was fighting that battle in public, a much quieter and far more personal war was already underway behind closed doors. During the preparation for his 2024 tour of Australia and New Zealand, Cliff underwent a routine medical examination required by his tour insurers. He was not worried. He felt well. He was performing. He was, by all appearances, exactly what he had always been: ageless, tireless, and impossibly energetic for a man in his 80s. The doctors found a tumor. Early-stage prostate cancer. Caught before it had reached his bones. Caught before it had spread. Caught, as he would later say, just in time. And then he did what he had always done with the parts of his life he was not ready to share. He kept performing. He kept smiling. He carried it quietly, the way he had carried so many things quietly, while thousands of people in darkened arenas had no idea what was going on beneath the surface. He revealed it publicly during a conversation with Dermot Murnaghan, a broadcaster facing his own stage for cancer diagnosis. The two men sat together and spoke with the kind of raw, unguarded honesty that comes when the performance finally stops. Cliff said men need to stop believing they are invincible. He said early diagnosis is the only reason he is still standing on that stage. He said he is currently in the clear, but he will never be able to say with certainty that it will not come back. He is now pushing for a national cancer screening program. He has the support of King Charles, who recently announced his own progress in a separate cancer battle. The two men, one a king by birth, one a king by the charts, are aligned on the same message. Get tested. Go early. Do not wait until the secret becomes too big to carry. And maybe that is the thread that runs through all of it. The secret romances, the double life, the accusations, the diagnosis kept hidden behind stage lights and encores and standing ovations. Cliff Richard has always been a man who knew how to carry things privately that would have broken someone else publicly. His faith helped. His discipline helped. His deep, stubborn refusal to let the outside world dictate who he was on the inside, that helped most of all. He gave away 10% of everything he ever earned. Not quietly, openly, as a belief. He flew to Uganda and Brazil to see where the money went. He watched his own mother slip away to Alzheimer's disease and poured his name and his resources into research funding in her memory. He built a tennis foundation that put rackets into the hands of over 200,000 children. The man the tabloids spent decades trying to undress turned out to be, in private, someone who was quietly giving himself away, not to a wife, not to children of his own, but to something he seemed to believe was bigger than any of that. The mystery of Sir Cliff Richard is not really a mystery at all. It is the story of a man who decided very early what he was willing to sacrifice, and then spent 60 years living inside that decision without flinching. He gave up love. He gave up marriage. He gave up the ordinary life that most people consider the point of everything. And in return, he got the stage, the knighthood, the decades of adoration, and the private knowledge that he had done it entirely on his own terms. Whether that trade was worth it is not really for us to decide. But now that the secrets are finally in the light, one thing is undeniable. This is a man who never stopped performing, not even when the performance was the only thing holding him together.